My 8-year-old son came home, hugged me and whispered, "They ate at a restaurant while I waited in the car for 2 hours." I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my keys, drove to the parents' house, walked in, and without thinking twice I did this. They left my 8-year-old son alone in a parked car while they went to a restaurant and had lunch for over 2 hours. That was the first sentence out of his mouth when he came home. He didn't cry. He didn't get angry. He didn't even seem confused. He just walked in, hugged me like nothing had happened, and quietly said those words. They went to a restaurant. I waited in the car. For 2 hours. I stood there in our kitchen, not really processing what I'd just heard. My hands were shaking and I wasn't sure if it was rage or disbelief. But I didn't ask any questions. Not yet. I didn't want to force him to explain something that should never have happened in the first place. I told him to stay inside, grabbed my keys and left. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the entryway of the house I bought for my parents. They were sitting in the living room like it was any other lazy afternoon. My mom was folding a basket of towels. My dad had a glass of iced tea in his hand. The TV was playing something none of them were paying attention to. Neither of them even asked why I was there. I told them plainly, "You have 24 hours to pack up your things. You're leaving this house." My mom froze. My dad looked at me like I was speaking another language. I repeated it. My dad laughed like this was some kind of joke. Like I hadn't just said I knew they left their own grandson locked in a car like he was nothing. My mom looked nervous for the first time in years. I asked them if it was true. They didn't deny it. My mom said he didn't want to come in. That he was being fussy, throwing a bit of a tantrum before they got to the restaurant, and they figured it would be better to let him sit in the car. My dad added that it was only 2 hours and that they checked on him halfway through. They had gone to eat at a nice Italian restaurant with my sister, her 2 kids, and apparently not a second thought about the fact that they'd left their grandson sitting in the back of a hot car with the windows cracked and no air conditioning. They had made a reservation. For 5. My parents. My sister. Her daughter. Her son. No seat for my kid. They didn't forget him. They excluded him. On purpose. Asked why. My mom said he'd been too much lately. That her other grandkids were easier. More polite. More predictable. They knew how to act in a restaurant, unlike him. That's when I stopped listening. I'd known for a long time that my parents favored my sister. Everyone in the family knew it. They'd sold their old home and used the money to buy her an apartment and help her open a boutique that went under in less than a year. When I confronted them about it back then, they said they trusted me to be fine on my own. That she needed more help. I didn't argue. I kept helping them when they needed it. Paid their utility bills without being asked. Bailed them out when their car broke down. I even bought the house they were sitting in. Transferred it to their name. Didn't ask for anything in return. But this wasn't about favoritism anymore. This was about cruelty. You don't leave a child alone like that. You don't isolate an 8-year-old while you're laughing over plates of pasta and drinks with your favorite grandchildren. You don't discard someone that young because they're not as easy or convenient. I told them again, 24 hours. Get out. My mom tried to defend it. She said I was overreacting. That he was safe. That he was fine. My dad said maybe next time I should teach my kid how to behave if I want him to be included. That was the moment I realized I didn't recognize either of them anymore. I turned around and left. Drove home. My son was on the couch watching a cartoon. He didn't say anything when I walked in and I didn't bring it up. Not yet. But I knew one thing. They were never going to be near him again. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. That was just the first crack in a wall that had been holding back years of things I hadn't seen clearly until now. The next morning I got a call from my sister. Not my parents, her. She didn't even ask how my son was. She got right to the point, accusing me of overreacting and creating drama where there wasn't any. I didn't even ask how she found out so quickly because I already knew. My mom had called her the night before, crying and twisting the story like she always did. Apparently, in their version of events, I'd burst into their home screaming, thrown papers at them, and stormed out threatening to leave them homeless over a small misunderstanding. What they left out was the part where they left a child in a car. I told her she wasn't part of the conversation and I hung up. Then I made it official. That afternoon, I had a lawyer draft a termination of occupancy notice, effective immediately. Technically, I still owned the house. I'd transferred it to them under a private agreement, but the title was in my name. I had let them live there for free. Property taxes, maintenance, insurance, all of it came out of my pocket. I printed the document and drove back over. I didn't even go inside this time. I left the letter in the mailbox, took a picture and texted my dad to check his mail. Within an hour, I got a string of furious messages from both of them. My mom sent screenshots of old receipts from when they helped me after college like she was cashing in a tab 2 decades late. My dad tried guilt. Said I was tearing the family apart over a misunderstood dinner. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Cold even. Because it wasn't just about the restaurant. That was just the most recent, most disgusting example of something I'd spent years trying to ignore. The way they had always treated my sister and her kids like royalty while my son and I were just an obligation. She'd made mistakes. Multiple failed businesses, job hopping, 2 messy breakups. But they still treated her like a prize. I had a steady job, raised my son on my own after his dad walked out. And somehow I was the independent one they didn't need to worry about. My son was 8 years old. He was bright, curious, and yes, sometimes full of energy. But never difficult. Never bad. The way they talked about him, like he was a problem to be managed, made me sick. 24 hours later, they still hadn't left. So I went back. When I walked in, the energy in the room had changed. Boxes were half-packed. My dad was sitting on the edge of the couch. My mom was in the kitchen pretending not to hear me come in. I asked them one last time, "Do you understand why this is happening?" And my dad said without blinking, "Your son brings this on himself. He acts out. He doesn't listen. We weren't going to reward bad behavior." That was it. The final nail. I told them they had until the end of the day. After that, I'd be changing the locks and filing a notice of eviction. They could take it to court if they wanted. I walked out. I thought maybe they'd calm down. Maybe they'd feel some kind of remorse. But later that night, my mom posted a status on Facebook. Vague, of course. About how some children forget the sacrifices their parents made, and how disrespect is the real pandemic these days. I didn't comment. I didn't message her. But a few of my cousins saw it. And one of them texted me, "Hey, is this about your kid?" That's when I realized they weren't just covering up what they did. They were trying to blame him. They weren't sorry. They were bitter they got caught. But I still had no idea what was coming next. By the time I pulled up the next evening, their car was already loaded. There were boxes stacked in the trunk, plastic bags shoved into the back seat, and my dad pacing the driveway like he wanted someone to witness the injustice of it all. My mom stood by the front door holding a bag of groceries like she didn't know where to put it. They'd packed, but they didn't believe I'd actually follow through. Not all the way. Until they saw me walking toward the front door with a locksmith. My dad stepped forward, tried to block me. Said it was still their home, that family doesn't do this to each other. I didn't say a word to him. I looked at the locksmith and nodded. It took 5 minutes. The door was rekeyed. Their keys no longer worked. When the locksmith left, my dad followed me to my car, still going on about how I'd let a child ruin the family. He said I was punishing them over parenting decisions. I turned around and asked him one question. "Would you have left my sister's kids in a car for 2 hours?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night they checked into a motel. I know because my mom texted me the address and said they hoped I was happy, that now they were on the street, and maybe I should explain that to my son someday. Like he was the one who had done this to them. But I didn't reply. Instead, I sat down with my son and gently asked him what had happened that day. Everything. Every detail. And he told me. They picked him up from school and said they were going somewhere special. He thought maybe a movie or the park. He was excited. He didn't ask questions when they pulled into the restaurant parking lot. But when he went to open his door, my dad told him to stay put. That they'd be quick. That this wasn't for him. He waited. He watched them walk inside. He said he kept looking at the restaurant door, thinking maybe they'd come out soon. He finished the crackers they left. He fell asleep at one point. When they came back, they didn't ask if he was hungry. They just told him to buckle up and said, "Well, tell your mom you were tired and didn't want to come." That was the lie they'd planned to tell me. That's what they would have gone with if my son hadn't said anything. It made me sick. And then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. 3 days after I kicked them out, I got a call from the hospital. My dad had been in a car accident on his way to pick something up from a storage unit. His leg was shattered and he needed surgery, expensive surgery. My mom called me from the waiting room, voice trembling now, asking if I could help. Not with money. With consent. They'd put me as an emergency contact when they moved into the house. Somehow I was still on the paperwork. Without me, he'd have to wait for emergency court approval to authorize the surgery. I paused. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. I just said I'm on my way. When I got to the hospital, my mom was sitting in a corner chair, staring down at her hands like she didn't know what they were anymore. I didn't say anything to her. I walked straight to the nurse's station, confirmed I was still listed as emergency contact, and signed the forms. That was it. It took 5 minutes to make sure my dad would get the surgery he needed. When I came back to the waiting area, she was crying quietly. He asked why I even came. Why I didn't just ignore the call. Why I still cared. I told her the truth, because my son was watching. I knew he'd ask where I was going when I left the house. I knew I'd have to explain. And I knew someday when he's old enough to look back on this, I wanted him to know exactly who we are, not who they are. We don't abandon people. We don't punish people when they mess up. We don't turn our backs when someone's hurt, even if they deserve it. She didn't have anything to say after that. Just nodded. While my dad was in surgery, I sat with her in silence. For over 2 hours. And not once did she ask about my son. Not once. Later that night, after I got home, my sister texted me. Just 2 words. You're pathetic. She hadn't visited our dad. Not once. Her kids didn't come. She didn't offer to help. She didn't even ask how he was doing. She just watched from the sidelines and mocked the one person who showed up. The next day I went back to the hospital. My dad was awake. Groggy, in pain, barely able to talk. I thought about turning around and leaving. But I didn't. I stood there and told him everything I needed to say. About how I wasn't angry anymore. Not because I forgave him, but because I didn't care to waste any more energy being hurt by him. I told him he had a choice now. He could keep blaming an 8-year-old for being too much. Or he could start trying to be the kind of man my son might want to know someday. He didn't respond. But he looked at me. For once, he didn't try to argue. When I left, I stopped by the nurse's station and paid the portion of the bill their insurance wouldn't cover. Quietly. Without calling anyone. Without asking for anything in return. My son was asleep when I got home. I sat on the edge of his bed and watched him for a minute. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. But this story wasn't over. Not yet. A week after the surgery, the hospital released my dad. I didn't go to pick him up. My mom found a way. I assume she asked a neighbor or maybe even called my sister, though I wouldn't be surprised if she got silence back. They checked into a small rental apartment across town. 1 bedroom. Barely furnished. My mom texted the address but didn't invite me. I didn't ask. Things got quiet after that. No angry calls. No Facebook posts. No dramatic group messages. Just silence. It felt like they were finally sitting with what they'd done. And honestly, that silence was more honest than anything they'd said before. Then 2 weeks later, something changed. I was coming out of the grocery store with my son when I saw them. My mom and dad were standing by the sliding doors like they'd been waiting. My first instinct was to turn around, walk the other way, but my son saw them before I could. He waved. They waved back. And then he looked up at me and said something that cracked me open a little. Can they come over now? I think maybe they miss me. He wasn't asking for them. He was trying to forgive without understanding what it meant. Because that's what kids do. They give second chances before people deserve them. I didn't answer right away. I told them we had ice cream melting in the car and we'd talk later. That night I thought about it for a long time. About how they'd thrown away so many chances. About how they'd shown me, over and over, who they really were. But also about what it would mean to not let them back in, now that my son was willing to. So the next day I sent one text. If you want to see him, you come here. And you earn it. They showed up the following weekend. No gifts. No excuses. My dad walked with a cane and he struggled up the steps. My mom kept her eyes on the ground the whole time. My son greeted them like nothing had ever happened. I watched the way my dad looked at him. Not like before, not with that tight-lipped tolerance he used to hide behind. This time he really looked at him. Said his name gently. Just about school. They stayed for less than an hour. My mom barely spoke. But when they left, my son smiled the whole rest of the day. He didn't know this was a test. He didn't know I was watching every word, every expression, waiting to see if anything had changed. But something had. Just barely. And then came the part one never expected. 2 weeks passed. Then another. My parents didn't ask to come again, but they called once, just to say hello. My mom kept it short. My dad asked if my son wanted to go get a burger sometime. Just the two of them. I said no. Not yet. And they didn't argue. That's how I knew something had shifted. For once they weren't pushing. They were waiting. Then one afternoon I got a call from my cousin Emily. He sounded confused, almost amused. She asked if I'd heard what happened with my sister. I hadn't. Turns out she'd gone back to my parents, or tried to, after finding out they weren't helping her pay rent anymore. She'd expected them to move in with her, help out with bills, maybe babysit like they used to. But they said no. Flat out no. She exploded. Told them they'd picked the wrong daughter. Accused them of betrayal, of abandoning her. She stormed out and hadn't spoken to them since. I didn't believe it at first. I thought maybe it was just another fight, one of those arguments families sweep under the rug and pretend never happened. But a week later my dad called. He asked if he could talk in person. He came by on a Sunday. Sat across from me at the kitchen table. My son was in the next room building something with Legos. My dad didn't apologize exactly. But he told me he'd seen something clearly for the first time. How much damage had been done by all the small decisions. All the times they brushed things off, ignored what was obvious, made excuses for what wasn't fair. And then he said something I never thought I'd hear. You were the one who showed up when it mattered. Not her. Not ever. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. He didn't cry. He didn't try to hug me. He just sat there owning it. And that meant more than any performance could have. Since then it's been slow. Careful. Controlled. They've seen my son a few more times. We meet on neutral ground, the park and ice cream shop. I watch their words. I watch their faces. I watch everything. But my son is happy. He laughs. He asks when we'll see them again. So I let it continue, one cautious step at a time. I'll never forget what they did. I don't need to. That part of the story doesn't get erased. But I did something I wasn't sure I'd be able to. I let them earn their place back. Not because they deserved it, but because he did. And that's where we are now. Not healed. Not whole. But finally honest. And that's more than we ever had before.